Hey, Mr. Pond Boss, tell me what to do to make all my Lunker Lake dreams come true.
Isn't that a catchy little tune right there, Chico? Good morning, Chico. How in the world are you, my friend?
I'm doing good. It's great to be here.
You know what? I'm leading a pretty cool life myself. So, hey, welcome to this podcast. Today we're going to talk about the myths of largemouth bass. You know, a number of years ago, I gave a speech for bassresource.com, and I didn't know what I was going to talk about. So the guy that owns it out there said, hey, just talk about the myths of bass. So I said, you know what, we can do that.
Plenty of them.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like what's the biggest bass you've ever caught?
8 pounds.
8 pounds. That's a trophy bass in anybody's books.
It was a trophy for me, yeah.
Yeah, heck yeah. And so when you're out fishing, you're a kayak fisherman and a pretty gifted angler, and you can get to some spots that big boats can't.
Yeah.
You know, of course, we could talk about that all day long, but the thing about some of the myths of largemouth bass is the first thing I want people to know, especially for a bass to get large, its odds are astronomical against it. The odds, and this is my estimate, it's going to be something in excess of 1 in 25 million from egg to double digits.
That's amazing. That's an incredible
and you know,
number.
The odds of you and I getting struck by lightning are 1 in 17 million. So, in essence, what has to happen is the bass has to be hatched and then not get eaten by its brothers and sisters, and to have the chance, the opportunity to live long enough to get to be double digits. And you know what? Part of those odds are you could throw out half of them the minute they're hatched, because half of them are boys.
Yeah.
You know,
females.
half are boys,
Yeah.
half are girls.
Yeah.
The only big ones that you're ever going to see are going to be the girls. So then, if you think about that, you know, people think just because they've got the best genetics that they're going to get to be huge. That's not necessarily true.
We hear that all the time.
Yeah, but
genetics.
That's right.
I mean,
now, you have to have those Florida genetics to get to double digits. You know, on a very, very rare occasion, a northern strain largemouth bass will hit it, but its odds are even greater. But when you see a double-digit bass in today's world, it's got Florida genetics in it. All right. So now
That would be really all of them. It would have to have come from a Florida strain?
yes. Greetings, Bob Lusk here, editor of Pond Boss Magazine and longtime fisheries biologist. Welcome to the Pond Boss podcast series. Got some great topics lined up for you. Glad you're coming along. We are brought to you by Purina Mills, makers of Aquamax fish foods, Texas Hunter Products, makers of fantastic fish feeders and other hunting products, Easy Docks, and huntbirddog.com. We're glad you're here. Let's go have some fun together and get our learning curve up. Yes.
Okay.
Now, I don't want anybody out there saying, "No, he's full of crap," because you can probably count on two hands the numbers of northern strain largemouth bass that made it to 10 pounds. But see, the problem is that northern strain largemouth bass lifespans, where they have the best growing season, is shorter than Florida strain largemouth
In
bass.
a much shorter season, too. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And so the thing about those odds, and here's where I was going to go. You could take the very best. I mean, you and I love dogs.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I've got girlfriends.
Yeah, they're hanging out here.
She's hanging out right here with me right now.
Yeah.
And if you're going to get a championship black lab, for example, you got to breed a champion with another champion. And then when those two superior genetic animals reproduce, say they have a litter of 8 puppies. How many of those puppies are going to be great?
Maybe one.
Maybe.
Yeah.
How many of them is going to be a runt?
At least one.
Yeah.
At least
Then how many of the rest of them are just going to be good family pets?
In the middle, yeah.
There you go.
That's most of your dogs. It doesn't matter who they come from.
That's right.
You're right.
That's right.
You're right.
So that champion dog has to have all the genetic traits, the right upbringing, the right training, or it's not going to be a champion.
Then the environment and everything else.
That's it. That's it. You know, if Shaquille O'Neal had not been fed well when he was a little boy, he might not have hit 7 feet.
Yeah.
You know, so largemouth bass, look at it that way. So let's say there's 100,000 fish, in this spawn. And out of that 100,000, there's only going to be a fraction that make it to adulthood. It's got to be those fraction that have everything they need. Now, here's where I'm going with that.
Okay.
When I stock a brand new lake, I like to stock about, and the mission is to grow double-digit bass. I like to stock 200 bass per acre, which that's higher numbers than what anybody recommends. But here's my thought. We're going to do a little math here. Here's my thought process. It's half of those are males. So there's 100 of them that are males. And when you're buying little bass this big with the best genetics and you're stocking them in your fishing lake, you know, you can't spread their fins and see if they're little boys or little girls.
It's not going to happen.
You know, and so half of them are males, half are females. Now, the 100 that are females, there's only going to be a percentage, which I'm going to tell you is 25, maybe 30% of those that will have the genetic potential, the aggressive nature, you know, the behaviors, and adjust to that environment if they've got the right amount of food that's going to excel. But you won't see that until about 18 months in. So out of those 100 females, you might see 20, 25, or 30 after 18 months or 2 years. Those fish are excelling and growing way faster than the rest of the batch.
Okay.
So when you start looking at that on a bigger scale, especially like in public waters, they're part of the reason you don't always see state record, like the state record. We live in Texas. The state record bass was caught in 1992, 31 years ago in Lake Fork. It was 18.18 pounds. Barry St. Clair caught that fish.
And it's on the wall.
And you know, that fish was an amazing fish.
Yeah.
You know, and so, but that fish was one of the original fish stocked into Lake Fork. So it had the opportunity. In today's Lake Fork, when those bass spawn, they're probably eaten not too far offshore from when they rise off the nest, because that lake now is full of largemouth bass, crappie, yellow bass by the thousands, you know, bluegills, red
Tons
ear,
of competition.
all those fish, not just competition, but those little baby bass are food.
Yeah.
You know, so one of the myths is that all bass have the potential to grow large. That's not true.
So I have a question though, but is that necessarily mean that's the smart ones? Do they have to have that as a factor?
No, one of my favorite things, you know, I promise everybody watching this video or listening to this podcast, every one of you can fish better than I can.
Maybe not. I don't know about that.
Well, you know, I climb in a boat and go fishing. You know, I'm kind of clueless.
My favorite fishing is in that electroshock boat.
Yeah, the electrofishing boat, and I'm really good with that.
That's fishing, yeah.
Yeah, but I'll tell you this, you're not going to beat me at raising the fish that you're catching.
Right.
You know, so when you're talking about asking the question if they're smart, they're not. They're not. They don't have the ability to think cognitively. Their memories are about 15 minutes long. So when you catch a bass, it's going to remember that for about 15 minutes. Now, you know, I can't tell you how many times we've electrofished a lake and that landowner wants to really dial in and grow some huge fish. So we'll tag the best of the best. So we'll catch some fish with the electrofishing boat, tag those fish, release them. And there's been many times where a few hours later or the next day or 2 weeks later or whatever, I go right back over the spot where we got that fish, and there it is again.
That same one?
So that some of those fish are territorial once they hit about 4 or 5 pounds.
But what about like smarts or memory for pain? I mean, that's got
they don't have nerve. They don't have nerve endings.
Okay.
So what they have, look at it like Pavlov's dogs. You know, if they get rewarded, then they'll respond. You know, food here, respond. Food there, go get it. Food there, safe place to reproduce, go there. You know, if they have a place where they won't get eaten and aren't likely to be ambushed, they're going to go there. You know, but going back to that topic of smart, the myth is that fish can think. They can't. They don't have the ability to think. They act and they behave based on their instincts. You know, what's bred into them genetically and by conditioning. So
I see the conditioning and the instinct.
So a longer a bass lives, the more conditioned it gets. Like one of the things, one of my pet peeves is somebody may catch an 8-pound bass out of a lake like Lake Fork, put it in their live well, haul it to Oklahoma City, and put it in their pond.
In the pond, yeah.
That fish stands very little chance to survive and thrive in that pond, even though there might be 10 times the amount of food and a lot better habitat. That fish grew up in that lake, in that environment, in that water chemistry, with that food
conditioning
chain.
Then.
Yes.
That goes to the conditioning.
Yes, so it was conditioned to that environment.
So not memory, necessarily brain memory, survival? More
Well, survival is part of the instinct.
Okay.
So, a largemouth bass is built for short bursts of speed. So they're quick.
Sure.
Now there are cruisers. There are bass are out there that'll cruise. There was one lake in particular where we put a tag inside of a bunch of fish and tracked their movements. There was one bass that weighed 7 pounds. That was long and lean, and that bass on any given day might go 1.5 miles in random patterns in that 125-acre lake. Then there was another bass about 6 or 7 pounds that was tagged, never left an area any bigger than a football field. So those behaviors are born into them. When the eggs are hatched, when the eggs are fertilized. So that's some of the myths. Another myth, there's and anglers, most anglers know this, but there's 3 reasons a bass will bite your bait.
Right.
When you caught that 8-pound bass, or those 2 bass that were hovering around 8 pounds that you were telling me about, how'd you do that?
2 totally different situations. One was deep trolling, bouncing the bottom with a crankbait, making a lot of noise on the bottom. And the other one was flipping side to side in a kayak in 3 feet of water on ladybird. So not even the same, but there was a lot of brush cover where that bass was. Mm-hmm. It was in a lot of cover, maybe waiting for things so it could ambush.
Okay, so there's 3 fundamental reasons a bass will bite a hook. Okay. What are they?
An aggressive strike, so a reaction.
Reaction strike.
They're hungry.
Because they're hungry.
And they're just
defending a territory.
Defending a bed.
Gotcha. So like when a big bass finds a home and it conditions it into that place where it's safe, it doesn't want anything else coming in there. Mm-hmm. Like how many times have you heard the story, and folks that are listening to this or watching it, how many times have you caught a bass right there and then come back 5 or 6 days later and catch it again right there? Because that bass has made that place
or
that
somebody
home.
Else catches it again.
Yeah, and it's going to defend that territory the best that it can.
Uh-huh.
Another thing, when a bass reaches about 17.5 inches, it's almost 3 pounds, and that's when its mouth is about the right size to eat bigger bait or bigger fish. So one of the things that people don't really think about is the time that it takes from a bass to get from egg to 17.5 inches influences how big it's going to get by the end of its life. So
that's a start from that. It can't gain it and all of a sudden just get hungry or get a lot of bait and get that big.
So like when we're managing a lake, one of our goals is to get to 17.5 or 18 inches as fast as possible. And I've seen that happen in 2 years. I've seen it happen in 18 months on a rare occasion. The lake you and I were working on up near Kansas City.
Right.
5-pound bass in 2 years. That's fast.
It was real ideal, though.
Yes.
Real ideal conditions in
yes.
Whatever that lake needed, it got.
Yes.
It got.
Yes, but there were also those fish that were 12, 13 inches that weren't performing.
Plenty of them.
In the same environment. And
your recommendation to that gentleman was you need to cull a lot.
Yes.
He's thinking this is so great. And it's like you're not taking out enough.
That's right. And that's one of the number one problems with bass management is under harvest. I had an intern working for me one time, and we went. He was going to school in Stephen F. Austin in Nacogdoches and worked for me one summer, and we were analyzing about a 30-acre lake. And the typical scenario we find are crowded bass that have been that way for several years.
Right.
And it's because the way it works is you stock a lake fresh, those fish are going to grow, and by year 3, they're spawning. So by the end of the season in the third year, you got all these babies growing up in that environment, and they're going to be 9, 10, 11, 12 inches long. Well, at that point, they begin to dominate the food chain because they're eating the food chain base when the bait fish are small. So they're really hammering those fish, And so the most common thing we see is a crowded lake overcrowded with bass. So what we'll do in that case, we were using the electrofishing boat. And our catch rates were high. Now, as a fisheries biologist, we're looking at what's our catch per unit of effort. What that means is when we're on the pedal on the electrofishing boat for an hour, how many bass do we catch? And we compare that from lake to lake to lake. This lake was like 250 bass in an hour. That's high.
Mm-hmm. And I've seen the way you do that. You do that because you've done this enough that you're counting as it comes in. Right away, you're saying, this is a good set of numbers.
Well, you can look at a fish and tell its condition, and you can tell by how many you're putting in the live well, just pretty much what condition the lake is in. So we electrofished for about 45 minutes or an hour, and the lake owner says, "You're going to tell me to harvest fish, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah,
every time.
I am." He says, "Well, you know what? Rather than weighing and measuring and throwing these fish back, I've got some coolers in my pickup. Let's just put them in the coolers." So I saw the countenance on this intern's face change. And so
he was thinking he had to clean those fish.
Well, I tell you, here's what happened. So we finished the survey. We probably load up 180 bass out of this 30-acre lake, which wasn't nearly enough, and put them into the guy's coolers. Loaded the boat, started getting back toward home base, and the intern was kind of quiet. And I said, you've been talkative the whole time we've been together. Now you're kind of quiet. And he said, I was raised on catch and release. My belief was you throw those little ones back so they can grow. He said, when you told him to eat the fish, he said, that hit me because to me, I've been raised where eating a bass is like eating the family dog. And I just started laughing. So people don't understand that culling is real important. Mm-hmm. It's important to manage the food chain. It's important to keep the numbers down. Be selective. Have selective harvest. So one of the myths is catch and release is an ongoing everyday deal. It's really not.
Now, public versus private in that, it's much easier to handle in a private lake.
Yes.
In public lakes, they do what they can.
Yes.
But you still wind up with really well-managed areas of a lake.
So here's the way that works. So one of the myths is that what you see over here is going to be the same as over there. It's not. When you get a 30,000-acre public lake, it's going to have its own little sub-environments. Mm-hmm. So this cove may be different than that cove, or this 40 acres is going to be different than those 80 acres. That open water is going to be different than this sheltered water. So you'll see populations of fish that are their own unique populations within the boundaries of that cove or that section of the lake. And another one of the problems about culling fish in a public reservoir is you're bound by enforcement and bound by regulations. Mm-hmm. Where in private waters we're not. We can manage those lakes just like we want to make sure the lake can produce the best it can. Another thing that's real important that's a myth is I know guys are constantly, when they've got their side scan sonar, or their electronics, they're looking at sometimes oxygen levels or where the bait fish are.
Yes.
I'm going to tell you the number one thing that's a myth is a largemouth bass is looking for its best temperature. It will forsake oxygen levels to get the right temperature because they're cold-blooded, and for their metabolism to operate at its peak capacity, the temperature's got to be between about 55 and 83 degrees, mm-hmm. preferably more like 68 to 75. That's the bass's best operating temperature for its body, for its cold-blooded body. So in the summertime, when the bass move away from the shallows into the deeper water, mm-hmm. they're going out there looking for a better temperature. Where the surface temperature might be 88 or 90 degrees, that if a bass is forced to live in water that hot, that's fatal.
Yeah.
Especially big bass, they can't live in that hot water very long. So what they do is they go down as deep as they have to to get the temperature they want as long as they've got just enough oxygen to breathe. And a bass, if it gets below about 3 parts per million, then that's when it starts to struggle to breathe. So as long as it's got 3 parts per million, that's enough. So if that temperature there is 78 degrees and it's 3 parts per million, and then go up a foot above the thermocline, then temperature's 88 degrees with 5 parts per million, they're going to stay down in that cooler water.
I was trolling for a striper in Travis when I caught that largemouth September in 30 to 40 feet of water.
Mm-hmm.
And that just shocked me to pull out a largemouth there when I was expecting a striper.
In 40 feet of water in September.
But right away I thought it wasn't fighting like a striper, it was running out of gas. It had less oxygen maybe? It gave up the fight quickly.
Yes, because when it gets hot, they're more lethargic. Okay, they're not as aggressive. When you start pulling that fish up from 40 feet, it's battling several things. First of all, the pressure is different down there because it's got 40 feet of water sitting on it. So its blood is more consolidated. Its cellular mass is more consolidated because there's pressure on it. So as you pull it up and that pressure releases, that's stressful to the fish.
Yeah.
So it's a good thing that it gives up the fight better because it doesn't utilize so much energy trying to battle all these different factors coming together. You know, and as long as you can release that bass pretty quickly, it's going to go right back down to that 40 feet. Now,
She survived.
Did she? Okay, so one and another one of the myths is about the way to handle fish.
Okay.
You know, like when you catch a bass in 40 feet of water, look down its throat. If you can see its air bladder poking out, then you need to know how to fizz it.
Fizz it, yeah.
You know, because you can poke a hole in the air bladder and that hole will cover back up.
We did have to fizz that fish.
Okay.
And it was scaring me because I was worried it wasn't going to survive.
Yeah.
And I would have had that marker.
Yes. And so when you fizz that fish, basically fizzing allows the air, because when the fish comes up, the air bladder expands because of the release of pressure coming up. So you got to let the air out so the air bladder goes back where it belongs, and then that little hole will seal over, and then it can use its air bladder to equalize the air bladder is what allows the fish to not have to swim and stay suspended at a certain level in the water.
Like us getting the bends.
Yeah, but it's different than that. The bends is what goes on in your blood. Okay, that's where gas under pressure comes up and expands and turns into bubbles. And you don't need bubbles in your blood.
Well, I'm always hearing, you see it a lot on social media where somebody posts a picture holding a fish, and you'll have 10 or 12 comments of, you're holding it wrong, or don't hold it, and it's that jaw angle.
Yeah. So when you catch a bass 4 or 5 pounds or bigger, don't lip it and then pick it up by its lip. It's okay to lip it as you're getting it from the water, but take your other hand. Be sure your hands are wet.
Oh, good.
Your hands have got to be wet. Yeah. Wet your hands, because you don't want the slime from the fish to stick on your hands. You want it to stay on the fish. That's the fish's first line of defense against disease, infections, bacteria, that sort of thing. So cradle it, and keep its mouth closed. When you lip it, cradle it underneath its belly, support the weight, get your pictures, revel in the moment, and then release the fish back into the water.
Or at least get it back in the water, let it move a little bit, get something flowing through it. Does that help?
No.
It does. It doesn't, huh?
Well,
it sure feels like it does.
Yeah, and that's why we do it. That's why we do it.
That's us. Huh?
Yeah, that's us. What that makes us feel like we're doing is helping the fish breathe better. Because if we can make water flow through its gills, that's how they breathe. So they use their mouths to be able to breathe by sucking water in to run across their gills. So that makes us feel better. But if that fish isn't healthy, you can try to make it breathe all day long, but it's got to breathe on its own. And so that's what I got to say about it. One other little myth that I want to dispel. One more little one.
There's plenty, I bet you.
Yeah. Here's another one. When I get comments from time to time from people about the way that bass spawn. Well, this is kind of a cool story. I remember when I first got in the fisheries business, I met Buzz Hartley from Hartley Fish Farms up in Kingman, Kansas. This was like 1981, a long time ago. And one thing he said just stuck. He taught me a lot. And one of the things that he taught me that really stuck in my head was he says that largemouth bass are going to start spawning right after you hear the first bullfrog croak. Well, I heard him say that, and being kind of a fisheries biologist graduate person thinking out of school, I'm thinking, so how does that correlate? Well, frogs come out of hibernation about the same temperature that largemouth bass get ready to spawn. So these bigger female bass don't lay all their eggs at once because they don't all mature at once. And what happens in the ovaries of the fish, the eggs mature in stages. So largemouth bass spawn in phases of the full moon. Now, when a female has some eggs that are ripe and she's ready, she's going to go find a nest where there's a male that's built a nest and is ready to go. And so what she'll do then is she'll go up, he'll court her, they'll do a little dance, bump each other, she'll lay some eggs, and then he'll fertilize those eggs. And then she'll go, and she may go spawn in another nest, and another female comes spawn in that nest with that guy. So it's not all one bass, one set of eggs in one glob. It might be several females spawning in to create one spawn. Now the other thing is the eggs that haven't matured will go ahead and mature, and then the next phase of the full moon, that big bass will spawn a second time. And in some years, in some cases, some of this is dependent on the temperature changes with the weather. There might be a third spawn. Really? And in a rare occasion, I'll see bass about that big in late September, early October, which tells me there was a late spawn, which could be the fourth one. But most of the time, the bass will spawn twice. Small bass will spawn once. Big bass spawn first.
A warmer body of water? What
really? They really start to prepare to spawn when the temperature hits about 58. And then once the temperature gets up in the 60s, that's when they start spawning again. And then they wrap it up by the time the temperature's in the 80s most of the time.
So a long, warm winter, fall to winter, could make that occur?
It could. Okay. It could, because now as soon as they spawn all their eggs, then the female starts to develop new eggs for next year. That's why in the fall, when you're culling bass, and you catch a female that's got a bunch of eggs in her, those weren't left over from the spring. Those are new eggs for next spring, and she's developing those eggs now. Oh. So Chico, hey man, it's been fun hanging out. There's a little bit of information that's going to take you a long way, and appreciate you guys listening, looking at this podcast. Hey, don't forget, pondboss.teachable.com. That's where the Institute of Higher Pondology sits online. And that is for guys that are getting ready to spend some money, building a lake, renovating ponds, and they want to save on the dumb tax. Now, you're going to pay for that, but I promise you the amount of money you pay for it is going to be worth it. So, once again, what a great time we've had. Appreciate everybody checking in with us. And Chico, see you on the next round.
Thank you. We'll see you.
All right. Wow, that was pretty fun, huh? I'm so glad that you joined us. Say, if you're looking for more information, I want you to head over to pondboss.com. We've got all kinds of cool information and been there forever. It's got some of the best articles, topics, got Ask the Boss discussion forum. And be sure to check out the Institute of Higher Pondology online as well. And subscribe to Pond Boss Magazine. That's what fuels the economy of what we're doing to help us put these shows on. So until next time, we'll see you then.
Hey, Mr. Pond Boss, tell me what to do to make all my Lunker Lake dreams come true.